I have analyzed all the evidence and came to the conclusion that Jesus Christ from the Bible had to be an alcoholic. I am also speaking from my own personal experience, as they are related by the phrase, "it takes one to know one." I wanted to know how long ago alcohol had been discovered. This led me to the search for literature that was based on realism rather than fantasy. Many people had written with intelligence and based on factual evidence centuries before the New Testament. For example, Aristotle, Confucius, Buddha, Plato, many other well-known ancients. These facts brought with them the question, why was such an important book written with so much imagination? Every lie is based on some truth. Once a lie has been told, people will build infinitely long stories to convince anyone of their lie. The search for the lie had begun. Jesus and his people were nomadic. They were in search of ways to pay for more wine. They convinced people God had sent them to get donations to pay for their wine bills. Once all the resources were used up, they moved on to the next village. No one likes to drink alone, and never take a ballroom promise seriously. People tell exaggerated stories of their accomplishments while drinking, and may even claim to have evidence. Usually, both people involved will make plans to validate the evidence, but once they sober up, the person and proof is gone. There are many stories of miracles to convince a drunk of Jesus' exaggerated accomplishments in the New Testament. I'm going to read this excerpt directly from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. But what about the real alcoholic? He may start off as a moderate drinker. He may or may not become a continuous hard drinker. But at some stage of his drinking career, he begins to lose all control of his liquor consumption once he starts to drink. Here's the fellow who has been puzzling you, especially in his lack of control. He does absurd, incredibly tragic things while drinking. He is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He is seldom mildly intoxicated. He is always more or less insanely drunk. His disposition while drinking resembles his normal nature but little. He may be one of the finest fellows in the world. You let him drink for a day and he frequently becomes disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial. He has a positive genius for getting tight at exactly the wrong moment, particularly when some important decision must be made or an engagement kept. He is often perfectly sensible and well-balanced concerning everything except liquor. But in that respect he is incredibly dishonest and selfish. He often possesses special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, and has a promising career ahead of him. He uses his gifts to build up a bright outlook for his family and himself, and then he pulls the structure down on his head by a senseless series of sprees. He is the fellow who goes to bed so intoxicated he ought to sleep the clock around. Yet, early the next morning, he searches madly for the bottle he misplaced the night before. If he can afford it, he may have liquor concealed all over his house to be certain no one gets his entire supply away from him to throw down the waste pipe. As matters grow worse, he begins to use a combination of high-powered sedatives and liquor to quiet his nerves so he can go to work. Then comes a day when he simply cannot make it and gets drunk all over again. Perhaps he goes to a doctor, gives him morphine. So you kind of getting my drift here. He's a really great guy, but when it comes down to it, he is a total drunk. That's page 21 from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. There are many references to Alcoholics being the greatest people in the world, nicest, and everything else. Is there anyone in history that fits this description better than Jesus? He was the nicest guy and went to great lengths to prove it. Why? Everyone also knows exactly what happened when his structure came down. When he finally pulled the structure down on his head. Speaking of his tragic and gruesome end, I will explain my theory of it in horrifying detail, so I will give you some time to stop listening if you are faint of heart, under 18, or just can't handle horrific, gorish, and just plain awful stories. Leave now if the truth sickens you. Right, everybody still there? So we have some guys having a party, and they run out of wine. A couple of them go steal some from the Romans, but Judas gets caught. Tells the Romans Jesus did it. Jesus tries to convince them his godly powers made it from water to no avail. They give him every opportunity to admit to the lies and deceit, and his following cry out for his release. The Romans inform the people of his crimes, and the people cry out for proof of his divinity. He must bear his cross and escape his agony alone. God does not save him from flogging his back wide open, carrying the heavy wooden cross uphill, or even being nailed to it. All this while wearing a crown of thorns. Once he is erected upon his cross, the Romans cut open his stomach to drain their stolen wine out of him. Let me know what is more believable, my theory or the Bible's version.